If you've ever been an urban explorer, you probably have at least one experience that has scared you senseless. For me, it was a few weeks ago. I've tried not to think about it, tried to pretend it happened differently. Well, that, and the fear of something else happening after the fact, kept me on edge for a couple of weeks. Now I think I'm out of the woods, no joke intended. You see, I live in the deep south, far away from any large cities with old buildings. However, there are ghost towns and ruins and woods all over worth checking out if you're ever down here. On this particular day, I was driving home from a relative's house and my GPS had turned me around. I wound up on a one-lane dirt road, looking for an opportunity to make a U-turn. It was after a few minutes that I came across what looked like a dirt driveway. It was surrounded by trees on both sides, and a chain ran across the entrance with a bright red "No Trespassing" sign. I couldn't see too far in, but it looked unused for some time. I immediately lit up. I got out of my car and dropped the chain. From there I drove onto the path and rehung the sign to help avoid being caught. The path was overgrown with grass and vines, lined with thick forest on either side. The ground was dusty, and the skinny brown trees provided a claustrophobic feeling. Bushes and stalks of tall grass scraped my car. However, at the end of the trail was a clearing. It was a large circular field of overgrown grass in the middle of this distant woodland. In the center of the clearing was what appeared to be a large, desolate house. The house was 2 stories tall and clearly huge for the era when it was built. The windows and doors were all boarded up on the first floor. The whole thing had a nasty grain-brown stain from the years of elemental exposure, but you could see that it was beautiful in its prime. I imagine the place had been abandoned for some time. There was no sign of electricity being run from the main roads. There was no sign of modern appliances being outwardly installed, and there was a rusty pump out front. By the architecture, it looked like a brothel one would see in old Main Street towns, but there was no other signs of any other buildings for miles. I approached the creaky and rotted front porch looking for a way in. I found one of the boards loose on the front downstairs window. I peered inside for a long time before deciding to enter. The smell of rot and musty wood blasted my nostrils. I had smelled it enough times to just ignore it. I was more concerned of chemical smells or cigarettes, indicating someone was there, but there was none of this. The entire bottom floor was bare. There was no furniture, no kitchen. The entire main floor was just bare wood with dust and what looked like mud and other gunk in various states of decay. There was a main staircase leading to a second floor. It had several rooms and hallways going in both directions out of sight of the main floor. From the looks of it, this place may have been an inn. I pulled the board back as quietly as possible. You never know if a cop is in earshot, even in the most abandoned places. I crept through the window and dropped in. Dust was immediately kicked up, and I got a better view of the debris all over the floor. Wooden rocks and housing materials all shattered and scattered about. I looked around from my now better vantage point. There was some light trickling in from holes in the roof and the non-boarded upstairs windows. They faced the front of the house and were a rich maroon stained glass. I then realized something about the house I must have not initially noticed. The bottom half of the staircase was gone. It looked like it had been smashed away. The gap to the floor was probably the height of an average man. I could jump up there, but I wanted to see the downstairs first and make sure I was clear. I watched my steps carefully as I made my way to an enclosed room, which was probably a sitting area. It was there I saw something else I had missed. At the back of the room was a doorway leading downstairs. It must have been a basement or a cellar of some sort. It was pitch black from the frame onward. I reached for my phone and cursed under my breath. It was still on the charger in my car. I guess because there was no service, and I stumbled on this place during the daytime that I didn't even think to grab it. I turned to go to the opposite direction towards the empty kitchen room. I was almost there when I heard an unmistakable noise. Footsteps. They sounded like a pair of heels or dress shoes coming in rapid succession, growing louder as they reached the doorway. It was out of my line of sight, and there was no way to see it until it emerged. At first, my brain wouldn't comprehend it. A dog? A bear? No. What am I seeing? Oh God, I muttered. From the corner emerged a massive, hairy monstrosity. It was the tusks that gave it away first. This was a boar, a huge, black, rancid-smelling boar. By the looks of it, he must have easily doubled me in size. His tusks were long, and bits of his matted, wiry hair gave way to deep scars. It turned to face me. Now, if you've never encountered a boar in the wild, they can vary in size. However, they are all dangerous. They have sharp teeth, a violent charge, and will most likely consume you if they are hungry enough. These things are demons of the forest, and I had never seen one apart from in tree stands or mounted as trophies. This one towered above all of those. I sucked in air, waiting for a reaction. It bent, snorted hard, and planted its feet. In a split second, I knew my only safe bet was a clean jump to the staircase. I bolted to the right as the beast charged. Its tusk nearly pierced my leg as I jolted away. I took one running leap, and my arms connected enough to pull myself up. I rolled a few extra steps and heard its hooves slamming the wood below me. It was shrieking and snorting and kicking up dirt and debris in a fit of rage. That's when I started laughing. It wasn't a good-natured laugh, but a panic attack manifested in the form of mania. It stopped after a short spell. I then took a deep breath and continued up the staircase. At this point, I was going to have to wait until the commotion downstairs ceased to find an exit. The banister at the top of the staircase extended to a wall in both directions. From there, it was a hallway with rooms on both sides. I noticed some rooms had doors and others didn't. I chose the first door to my right. It had a door that cracked about a width of my body. Inside was old, rotting furniture. Dressers, bed frames, doors, and cabinets were all stacked in a pile. Behind it all was a small gap and an unboarded window facing the roof, its bottom half missing. I was standing in the doorway when I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. A creak. A long, drawn-out, ominous creak. The mild scare was then punctuated with a nauseous fear by the sound of a muffled cough. It was coming from the end of the opposite hallway. I quickly and quietly made my way into the room and hid behind the pile of wood and garbage. Thankfully, the boar was still slamming around downstairs, so my mistakes were masked. I had a small hole in the pile to see the doorway and slightly into the hall. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was audible. My lungs were on fire and I could feel my eyes moisten. The birds outside the window had gone completely silent at this point. I then heard a now familiar sound. That's when I heard hoofs. I heard the exact same clopping I had just heard minutes ago. Another one? I thought in a terrified moment. I strained my eye to see into the hallway, hoping the noise would stop or go in the opposite direction. It heard me laugh. It definitely knows I'm here. It was in that moment of brutal tension that I saw it. The unmistakable snout, led by two long tusks. It kept moving, revealing fur and a snarling mouth. However, it then made my mind readjust again. It didn't have eyes, rather just shrunken, dried holes with nothing behind it. Its skull carved in a way that boars don't usually carve. At the back of its head looked to be a leather strap, then a different color of hair, then flesh. Then I saw the hooves, bloodied, detached above the base, the empty fur pulled up around a man's waist like a rotten leather glove. He was naked apart from the severed boar's head and hooves. He walked on his hands and feet. He made no noise other than a few huffs. Dried blood caked the areas of flesh where the body parts were worn. He was hidden, but still large enough to be easily a threat. I really don't know how to explain it. It was so weird, so vile that I can't wrap my head around it. He moved his head into the room, but after seconds that felt like hours, he turned. His body in a contorted curve as he balanced his feet and hands in the severed hooves. He clicked his way down the hall and out of sight. In this moment, I had two options. I could risk the stairs and boar, or take the window to the roof and risk the masked psychopath being on my heels. I had my mind made for me. It was then I heard a shriek so inhumane, I've had nightmares about it. It was sharp and high, but muffled and resounding. It sounded wet, but also wheezed. It was followed by a rapid clopping on the wood. It was coming right for me. I scrambled out of the small opening at the bottom of the window and rolled out onto the roof. The drop was a risk, but the only way I could get out fast. I heard the stomping enter the room, and I let myself down as safe as I could. By some miracle, I rolled onto the ground with nothing worse than having the wind knocked out of me. Without turning back, I scrambled to my feet and bolted for my car. As I opened the door, I heard the shriek again. I heard the monster downstairs slamming into the front door. I heard the creature upstairs slamming into the window and screaming its putrid lungs out. Without looking back, I slammed my car into ignition and sped off. I skidded through the grass towards the path and ripped down the post holding the chain as my car burst back onto the dirt road. I raced back the way I came and found my way home in a shaking panic that lasted for hours. I spent that night wide awake. That was the end of it. Although I don't get it. I don't get why a person would live in such conditions to live out a fantasy that makes sense only in their mind. I don't know. What I do know is if you do this stuff in the country, just be prepared. You may not meet a gang member, or a drug dealer, or a junkie, but you may meet something far more dangerous. You may meet something that defies all reason. You may meet something that would eat you alive.